Notice the parallels here, guys, to strength training. Those members that are waiting for the perfect opportunity, when they'll have enough time, when they won't be tired, when they'll have the headspace to improve their diet, when the new year starts. These are not successful strength trainees. These are not successful strength trainees. These are not the people that dedicate themselves to our gyms and spend the money that we require to afford staff like Tony. The same thing applies to wanting to become a coach. I think that's the main theme here. If you glean anything from Tony's process, experience, story, it is that you have to take ownership. You are the one responsible for your own progress. This applies to you as a trainee. This applies to you as a coach. If you're willing to go above and beyond, if you're willing to take responsibility for your education, then you can reap the rewards the way that Tony has. All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're joined by Tony Stein, starting strength coach at Starting Strength Houston. And I wanted to have Tony on today because we got a request from Francesco De Caro on the forum to answer a question for him, which essentially is, what is the process like for an aspiring coach to become an apprentice at one of these gyms, to become an SSC, and then to become a head coach? And Tony's done all that. So if you're interested in this topic, please proceed. Continue to listen and watch. If not, we'll see you on the next one. This is a rather niche episode, Tony. So we're talking to primarily aspiring coaches, and we're talking primarily to people that are so into what we're doing that they want to hear what it's like for an aspiring coach to do what you've done. So let's start there. Break it down for us. What did you do? Where were you in life? What motivated you? Just kind of give us the context about how you got started with JD and the team over at Starting Strength Houston.
Well, so I guess this is a real fun story to tell because I was on the cusp of there being a planned path to the credential. Historically, there hadn't really been a planned path to it. So I really first started lifting in kind of like late 2016, early 2017. Read the book, got super excited about it, started putting on weight, getting my lifts up, eventually sought coaching for it. And I was really excited to, just like everybody, share this with, family, friends, anybody who would tolerate me talking about it, basically. But at the time, if you wanted to pursue the credential, it meant that you went to an affiliate gym, because these gyms didn't exist yet. That you got into contact with somebody, that you lurked on the forums, that through one way or another, you kind of tried to acquire the skills to do this. And so eventually it came that the gyms were opening, and I was super excited to see that we were going to have a Houston one. And I got in touch with JD as soon as possible. And then when the news that Chase came out that Chase was going to join us, that was super cool too. So it was kind of the biggest fanboy experience when before we were in a desert. So like the first time I ever did what...
Now that you've met your idols, did they deliver or did they disappoint you?
Oh, 100% they delivered.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, then you need to get to know them better. That's usually not the case.
Well, we'll keep it clean and professional for this, right? We'll say. But when I did like what you'd call an intro session, I drove all the way down to Richmond, to pay Randy Winfrey cash to like learn the lifts in his garage. Okay. So a few years ago, if you wanted to see a starting strength coach, that was kind of the deal that it was either I was going to drive there or drive up to Kingwood to see Andy. Right. So, and I remember typing in because it was like for the early interest list for Houston, they're like, hey, where in town should we put this? And I'm like, oh, obviously you should put it down the street from my house in Montrose. That'd be the best thing you could do. And lo and behold, here we are. Which has ended up being the best thing kind of like advertising wise for us. But in any case, I got to start at Starting Strength Houston as an intern, and they interviewed a whole lot of people. So there were only a few of us that ended up doing it. I think they ended up talking to a pool of like maybe 20 people, and 2 or 3 of us started as interns. And out of that initial batch, for some reason, I'm the only one still hanging on. So time passed. Chase went to Oklahoma, and that kind of freed up a space for me to step into the head coach role here. As Josh, if he didn't have to drive into the loop, why bother? So he took Katie. And since it's down the street from my house, it works out perfectly for me.
Excellent. Congratulations on the progress. I remember going out to, I think we had food and drinks. This must have been 2+ years ago. And you were still an apprentice at the time. And I remember when you got your SSE, and you've come a long way, man. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I want to go back to the interview process, because my goal here is just to kind of let everybody know what to expect if they're going to apply at one of these gyms. JD's pretty unique because his leadership style is, he has a style. He's very intentional about the way he manages people, and he's a big fan of the Jocko stuff, extreme ownership, that kind of thing. So I imagine your interview with him was intense, because I remember my interview with him was intense, and I didn't know I was being interviewed. So before we even opened our first gym, I met JD at Wichita Falls, and Rip, Nick, and I sat together in the room there at the gym, and we're having a conversation, and I'm trying to get an idea of who JD is and if he's going to be a good fit for us. And he's just rifling off questions at me in a pretty intense fashion. I mean, JD is not only is he giant, but he's pretty straight faced and direct. So I was like, man, this is intense. I want to hear how your interview went with him for both those reasons. So what was the vibe like? What questions did he ask you? That kind of stuff.
First thing is assuming there was only one interview, because I feel like there were 4 or 5 of them at a certain point.
Hire, slow, fire fast is our recommendation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Fortunately, I haven't forced him to do the latter yet. But so we talked on the phone or via email a couple of times. And I think the first time I actually met him, he invited me up to, there was a squat coaching camp at Wichita Falls. So I still hadn't met him in person. He's like, oh, hey, this sounds like a great opportunity. You should come up for this. And I'm like, okay, if I want this internship, I guess I'm driving to Wichita Falls. So at that point, I had my own kind of small business where I was coaching people out of my house. My wife, at that point in time, my girlfriend, was supportive enough that she's like, if you had a gym at home, you wouldn't have to, drive to the gym and spend all the time there. And she's like, maybe I do a little bit of lifting too.
And then you just propose on the spot. You're like, that's it, babe. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Rings in my pocket. Let's go.
Done. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing left to say after that. So she was really supportive with everything. God bless. Had a home gym and had maybe at most a roster of about 10 people come to the house. And that was really fulfilling. But so JD invited me up to Wichita Falls, and that was when I got to meet him and a couple of other people who were in Texas who were thinking about interning with us. And so it was great because, I was just doing at it at home, and I got to have like Rip and Chase, giving me feedback. And I remember, we all try, and we don't realize sometimes how short we're coming of the model until we actually get in person and get some feedback on our coaching. Because I must have put somebody in like the squat bottom position. I'm officially 10 seconds into like the squat teaching progression when like Rip yells, like he hasn't even left his office yet. Like he's in his swivel chair and he's like, look at his knees. And it's like, of course, I had my guy pushing his knees, what to me was just slightly outside the toes. And that was unacceptable. And so it was time to start learning.
Rip's coaching skill from his office, 50 feet away, is always impressive.
Right. He could hear that the knees were too wide. Yeah, he could smell it. Right? Yeah. He didn't have to see it.
Man, I fucked up coaching a guy in the deadlift once at Wichita Falls, and Rip noticed it was the most embarrassing thing of all time because it was such a bonehead mistake. But the guy was this gangly, skinny dude and probably 6'6", and I just was like, I couldn't kind of wrap my head around what I was seeing. And then Rip caught it, and I'm like, shit. So I know the feeling. Yeah, we've been there.
Yeah, it always fleshes something out. If there's some inadequacy or something that you're missing, the platform is a great place to find it. Mm-hmm. So let's see. That was a little while out from Houston actually opening. And then they set up another time where Josh and Shelly and JD all kind of came to my house and watched me coach one of my own lifters. So that was really cool too. And JD ate all of the Reese's peanut butter cups that we had out.
Naturally.
So yeah, it was it was the beginning of a good relationship. And that was, it was just super awkward to have everybody kind of like, just standing around looking super buff while I like coach.
What did your client think of that? How did you communicate that one?
She's like, I hope I did well. I hope you got the job.
Don't make me look bad.
Yeah. I appreciate. Well, you try and pick the person who looks the best, right? Yeah. So
Starting Strength gyms, we will come to your house.
Yes. But I really kind of appreciated how seriously they took the process.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Started as an intern. It took a while because we had COVID as well. Come on, that was kind of a challenge for us. Because it must have been just a couple of months past before we were open. And then in March of 2020, everything was shut down. And it's like we saw a big decline.
You had hardly been open 9 months.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you were shut for 2.
Yeah. So we were fast out the gate and it was awesome. And then that kind of put a hamper on things.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, you were shut for 2. And then JD was one of the guys that all committed to this new policy of we are not going to close down. Government, we appreciate the fact that you think that you are our mother, but you are not. And,
right.
We are running a business, and a business requires commerce. And in the absence of commerce, the business fails. And we're not willing to throw away everything we've built just because of your misguided policies.
No, sir.
Most people responded really well to that. I did an article called "We Will Not Comply," and I outlined our rationale. And one person quit. And that person was from Houston. One person quit that I'm aware of because of that article, and that person was from Houston. But
oh wow,
we're not for everybody, as we've said many, many times. All we can do is attempt to do what we think is correct and behave in earnest. And attempt to provide value to the people that we need to take care of, our members, coaches, owners, everyone in between. And if along the way that pisses some people off, it's not our intention, but it's part of the gig. So it is what it is. The bleakness of COVID aside, how long?
Yeah.
Well, actually, let me ask you, what were you making any money at the outset, or were you just doing unpaid and kind of observing at the start?
Oh man, it was, so my very first shift, Chase had me coaching people in the bench press, right? Like, okay, go and teach these people to bench. And Chase, he initially, I think, kind of let the reins out as long as, I didn't make him regret that. And it would be sort of like he'd watch and he'd give a lot of feedback. And that was sort of the way. It wasn't like a super like, you and me are shoulder to shoulder. It was sort of like observation. It's like, okay, here are 3 ways that you just fucked up. Don't let me see you do that again. And so that was really rewarding because it's like you end up talking to a lot of other people and it's so easy to kind of like armchair quarterback, or talk about angles or go so deep. And in a way, it was a really valuable learning experience to have somebody like Chase be like, look at their fucking feet, like pay attention. And I think that was a helpful way to learn the material instead of trying to make it overly complicated,
That's how you know the guy grew up with a grip. Straight to the point, not very polite, effective.
Well, so I came from a food background, kitchens where it was kind of normal to get yelled at or have things thrown at you or, to not always be treated the best. So like to be told like, don't do this, sort of worked with the experience that I'd had.
It helps if you're not sensitive as an aspiring coach and as a member. We try to cater to our member sensitivities as much as possible because they're paying a pretty penny. But ultimately we're here to help you get better. And we appreciate people that are coachable and are not overly sensitive.
Yeah. Well, so that's, I think to anybody who's considering getting into the job, right, to just like veer and change direction as much as possible in conversation. But anybody who's thinking of getting into the job, the coaching has to be something that you figure out and you get down pat and you could do, it's one thing if you have one-on-ones that you're seeing in your garage, right? But you need to be able to do that with like 8 people at a time for, sometimes 10 hours straight if it comes to it, right? But it needs to be solid to that level such that you can also manage kind of like personality and psychological things that are going on with people. To see that somebody's coming through the door and maybe isn't like acting like themselves, and you can have that conversation, see what's going on with them, see if they need a light day, see if they need, a conversation. And you need to be able to kind of fit that into like a minute and a half while you're also keeping track of everyone else who's like warming up and coming in the door,
Yeah.
So it becomes this kind of interesting juggling act. And it's really good to find out early on what your motivations are for doing this kind of thing. Because if we're used to watching like powerlifters set PRs on Instagram, and you think that you're pursuing some glamorous life like that, rather than helping people like, rehab and regain function, like post surgery or become independent, or like just talking through how to like do your warm ups and show up on time with people, that's, I think, where the real richness in the job is in a way, and the thing that you have to be prepared to dedicate a lot of time to doing.
Yeah, in fact, I'll take it a step further. I think to do this job effectively, you have to really care about people,
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not a hard job once you have the skill set. I mean, it's kind of like saying once you've done design for 10 years, being a designer isn't a hard job. True, it just takes a lot to get there, But one thing that is consistent across the entire gym franchise is that our coaches genuinely care about members. And I don't think there's any way that you can do this job unless that's the case, because you're showing up day in and day out. There's not a whole lot of variety. It's a few lifts, but you're helping people add weight to the bar. And when you help people add weight to the bar, then their physical situation changes and they improve their function and their mood improves and their capability improves. And that is satisfying. And if you care about how much people are enjoying their lives or not, then that's a really rewarding situation to be professional in. And if you don't, it's not the best fit. That is a feature of this organization. We depend on coaches who care for others, because it's the skill of the coach and the amount that the coach cares that equates to the member experience and the progress that the member sees under the bar. And that's really everything. Everything else around that is just noise. The gyms are pretty cool. We've got this YouTube channel. We've got equipment, got all this other stuff. Fantastic. But ultimately what it comes down to is, does that coach on the platform care about that member and have the ability to help that member move in line with the model and make progress every single time they show up to the gym until that's not possible, and then make progress as often as possible thereafter? So that's a critical point. The other point you made, which Absolutely. I want to reinforce because it's very important, is the responsibility of your education is yours. If you get through the process and you apply and pass everybody else that's applying and convince the gym owner and the coaches that you are going to add value to their operation, great. What you should not do from there is assume that you just need to kick back and then the education will come and you'll be guided through the process. That is absolutely not the case. Coaches at Starting Strength gyms are self-motivated people. This entire program, this whole process is built around, I want to be better tomorrow than I am today. That has to apply to you as a lifter, and it has to apply to you as a student when you're learning this information. So if you show up to the gym, kick back, and just wait to absorb information by osmosis, you will not last very long. If instead you're a Tony Stein
to come back.
and you take responsibility for your own education and you ask questions of coaches, when you give a cue or you try to correct something and you're not sure, you find out from the pro standing right next to you if you did the right thing. If a pro standing right next to you does something that you're not aware of or not familiar with, you follow up and you ask, and you're just continuously learning and you're hungry for that information. And then the next topic I want to talk to you about, Tony, is when you're not in the gym gaining practical experience, you're spending your time learning the theoretical side of this and immersing yourself in the material, not to pass a test like what we're used to in school, but to gain a level of understanding and expertise that will help you become a better coach so that you can understand what's happening and you can explain what's happening, in addition to being able to get people to move in line with the model. So Tony, feel free to comment on anything I just mentioned there. And then I'd also like to hear from you how you approach the prep course.
So for people who are just now beginning to think about doing it, they kind of don't know how good they have it in terms of having accessible gyms, right? As far as people have access to the franchise gyms as they're coming up. And then also the online course, right? So anybody doing this beforehand had to be completely autodidactic about it. You just had to take the books and read them multiple times, or fly to a gym or drive to see a coach and invest that time, right? So I had been pursuing this credential myself without a whole lot of outside assistance for about 2 or 3 years when the prep course popped up. So it's like in the middle of studying, a well-planned path just kind of materialized for me. And that was really great. So to have the class and then to also have a place where you could get in-person feedback on your coaching was excellent, right? And I think having to do it yourself makes it difficult because you either sort of feel like you're trapped in this feedback loop of the books and the forum, or you're kind of reading outside materials, either from like people who have kind of splintered off from Starting Strength and kind of like might have a different viewpoint, or you're just reading like old school weightlifting stuff or things like that. So it was hard to get a pure message sort of about the theory and about everything that was going on. So getting to do the prep course and getting paired with D'Agostino was really, really cool. Because he'd produced a lot of materials and he was a person that I really, really respected, just sort of like as a figure that produced content for Starting Strength, and especially his information about cueing. So I was grateful for that. And so the prep course really gets you writing about the material in a technical way, which means that there's sort of a flip side that you have to practice on the outside, which is that you have to begin practicing that material with members or with friends or family instead, right? So you might write about it for the prep course the way that you'll typically talk to a doctor or an engineer. If you have one of them pop into the gym and they start throwing around like nomenclature, you can keep up, right? But you still kind of have to sit down with a friend, maybe like buy them a cup of coffee or a bottle of wine or something and be like, hey, I'm going to talk at you about weightlifting for an hour and you have to stop me every time something doesn't make sense, right? So as we pursue this, it can be hard because we might not commit fully to understanding the material and in its depth, right? And I think it's so easy to be a deconstructionist, and think that people are almost guilty just because they have a viewpoint, and somehow it's like more pure for us to like not commit to a viewpoint, and then that ends up holding us back, right? Like it's better to be agnostic about everything. And eventually you can start to think outside of a system, but you need to become an expert in it first, is sort of the thing.
Yeah, and before you try to poke holes in it, dear YouTube subscribers, make sure you understand what you're talking about. Because otherwise the argument back and forth will be a pretty short exchange.
Yeah, like you can take the whole thing that happened with like Rip and Lasha, right? Where like, for anybody who doesn't know, like Lasha Talakadze, best weightlifter of all time, right? Throws a ridiculous amount of weight over his head. And Rip is talking in the podcast about how amazing he is. And even though we perceive that there's some technical errors in his lifting, he's just so brutally strong that it doesn't matter. And kind of the problem with Rip is that he can take really complicated ideas and express them in super simple ways, and you think you get it until you try and repeat it to somebody else, and then you realize just how cognitively deficient you really are. Right?
Or you think you understand it, and you think he's wrong, but actually you don't know what level of thinking and research and experience has gone into that simple statement, and you've actually missed the whole point, and you're wrong. That Rip has gotten me on a few of those over the years, and it's pretty consistent.
It happens to all of us. Yeah. But so everyone gets angry because they're like, oh, Rip's saying that if Lasha did 5x5 power cleans, he'd be stronger and then he'd like do more. And he's like, no. He's saying he's so strong it doesn't matter. Right. And then we get burnt because even if you agree with what Rip is saying, you try and explain it to somebody who's not prepared to hear the information or wants to argue with you, and it breaks down and you're like, okay, something's wrong, something's missing, I have to go back and I have to study. So
yep. Yeah, to your point about what it took to become an SSC prior to the gym franchise being around. Well, I got my SSC in 2017. I think I'd gone to 4 seminars. At the time, there was no oral board. There was no prep course. It was a platform exam and it was a written exam. And unfortunately, I hadn't quite discovered the importance of continuing education. I didn't dedicate myself to learning things about my profession, which is a huge gap. And now that I've been exposed to all the starting strength people that are always learning new things and new skills, I've changed the way that I look at education. Because to me, education was always a negative thing. I hated high school. I lasted a year and a half. Went to community college. Took me 9 years to get a 4-year degree. And that process for me was not about how do I learn the information. It was how do I check the boxes so I can get a degree and have that degree as a backup plan in case entrepreneurship doesn't go well. That ended up working out, but it taught me the wrong way to learn. And so when I tried to learn the starting strength material, luckily I was really interested in it. So I had a lot of practical experience with my own lifting and with teaching friends and family. And then I had the theoretical experience that I understood from the books, but I never went deeper on the topics that I hadn't been exposed to. So I just barely passed the platform exam on my first try, luckily. And then when I went on to do the written exam, I prepared 44 pages and I was pretty detailed. The problem was I didn't fully understand the concepts, so I failed. And I just got some stuff that was wrong. I mean, physics is an objective field of study. So if you don't understand what a moment arm is and how moment arms apply to lifting weights, and you try to write about it, that will become very clear. So that was an embarrassment, but also a very good learning opportunity for me, not just in terms of this methodology and the material, but in terms of, as an adult, what does it mean to be a lifelong learner? What does it mean to try to become better at your profession? What does it mean to go deeper and understand the underlying concepts that apply to whatever it is you're trying to better learn? So I did my test for a second time, another 33 pages, so 77 pages. And in starting strength, no one cares about the quantity. It's not the same metrics, no vanity metrics. It's about, you can have a super short, succinct, concise written exam back when those were being done before the oral board. And you can get a perfect score. You could also have a lengthy one and get a perfect score. It's about the content. So my content was not correct. And the testing methodology, the scoring methodology is objective. So I failed. And I took it again and I passed. And then, SSC since summer 2017. And then since then, it is so much easier. It is so much easier to become a starting strength coach. Tell me about the prep course, because like I said, I haven't taken it because it wasn't around when I became a starting strength coach. What is that like? From the outside looking in, it seems like it is a college level piece of coursework that requires lots of studying and lots of engagement with your guide, your mentor in the prep course. And it seems like it's pretty systematic and it ties into the practical learning that you're doing in the gym. Can you expand upon what the prep course is like?
Absolutely. So here, I'll take a second and gather my thoughts about that, because you touched on a lot of interesting things there. So the first thing is, I'm going to go back a little bit before the prep course. So I did really, I wouldn't say I did poorly in high school, but I did what you would expect with just barely skating by, because you didn't feel like the process was for you, right? Or you weren't engaged by the process, or perhaps for some reason I felt the need to rebel against the whole process. But I fortunately had a few good teachers in high school who got me really motivated to read books and to challenge me and kind of put some idea into my head that a college education was interesting, if only for the exposure to ideas that I would get. And so I did go to college and I did pretty well there, focusing on ecology, evolution, anthropology, and linguistics. Were the things that I really liked to study, but completed a degree in anthropology. And the whole time, I never ever really had a job or a career planned, but I just enjoyed learning so much about humanity, language, biology, and our universe in general. And I wish that there was some motivation to make money, but I've really only ever been interested in ideas and things. And every job I've ever had has kind of been more of a function of monetizing some type of hobby or thing that I've liked to do rather than somebody says, oh, this is a good idea and you have to go do that. By the time that I was finally starting to pursue coaching as a career, every single person in my life was against me and wanted me to stay in food and wine and things that I had already been doing that had been successful, right? But it was just kind of jumping from one hobby to another, right? In college, I thought that I would maybe pursue like a PhD track and do some type of research in anthropology. I got out and really enjoyed cooking and gathering real life experience. And that had been so much more validating. Worked in wine, and then eventually through finally beginning to focus on my own fitness, came around to doing this. So when it came time around to do this prep course, part of me was even hesitant about it, right? I had felt like I had already dedicated so much time to doing it that to kind of be forced to do another one made me upset or made it feel like the time I had invested by myself wasn't worthwhile. So I really dragged my ass on doing it for a little while, before Josh could get through to me about investing more time in it. But by the time I came around, it was such an amazing opportunity because I think we get really worried about being right in our presentation of the material, in the way that we're coaching in the gym, in the way that we're writing essays. And it's not about being right at all. It's about just putting it all out there, getting the feedback on it and then revising.
Yeah. Showing what you know now and showing that you're open to taking feedback and being willing to expose your faults so you can work on them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember I would be writing, I was writing an essay about the shoulder, right? And we're talking about the overhead press. And I think that there was a little bit in the book, perhaps from an earlier edition, that talks about having balanced strength on each side of the rotator cuff or something like that. And I wrote that up in my essay for Nick, and he's like, well, I don't know so much about all that, but was kind of his feedback on that blurb. So it was good to have ideas that might have been older ideas or things that you're kind of suspicious about or ideas that you haven't even fleshed out. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to put it out there and we can talk about it instead of being insular and in your head and not speaking up because you're afraid of the feedback,
what's interesting is what you just described is the process of determining what is true, the process of uncovering knowledge, which is what science is really, the scientific method, right? What's amazing to me, and this is going to sound insane to those of you that are not really into what we're doing here and following all of our work, what's really odd to me is that this organization is one of the most committed to the scientific process of any that I've been exposed to, and certainly more so than the institutions that make policies that affect our lives that are supposed to be the people supporting, upholding, and practicing the scientific process. That's an aside, but I just, as you were speaking, I realized that that's a pretty unique situation. And then we're going to add on to that by sharing all of the logbook data from all of the gyms. We're in the process of building a front end for the logbook data, so I'll be able to capture averages, median, min, max for each lift across all age groups, both sexes, and we'll be able to divvy that information up, filter it out, and tell anyone, a 44-year-old woman walks into the gym, how much stronger are you going to be in 90 days? I can tell you on average what that will actually look like.
Yeah.
So it's great because this industry and just the world in general is, fashion over function. It's narratives, it's claims, it's bullshit. It's impressing people with the flash and the sizzle. And we are attempting to be engineers here. We're attempting to take a very sober approach to fitness. We're attempting to outline the irrefutable facts that led us to the conclusions that we have about health and fitness. And now, with the gym franchise, we're taking that information and demonstrating what it can do for people in real life, and then quantifying that with weight on the bar. And we have almost 1,100 members now, complete. We've got observation, hypothesis, test, and theory. And this will be rock solid, peer reviewed, in scare quotes, hardcore science once we have once we've closed the loop. So it's pretty cool to be a part of that, because there's so many claims being made by so many companies that cannot be backed up, that are pulled from thin air. And a lot of people eat it. A lot of people buy it. We were just looking at the Net Promoter Score for competing online services, because our online coaching service is new, and we're curious how we stacked up against Peloton and iFit and Beachbody and some of these others, and we are head and shoulders above them as a brand new entrant to the market. So our Net Promoter Score is 85. Peloton's is in the 70s. iFit is in the 40s. Beachbody, I think, is in the 30s. So more detractors than promoters. And, who has better marketing? Who has bolder claims? Who has sexier models? They do. But we deliver the results. And, that's extremely satisfying, to kind of be the opposite of what the rest of the industry is and just focus on the stuff that is objectively true. Yeah. So Tony, tell me how hard the prep course was. Like, what was it like? What was your weekly schedule for those people listening to this and they're kind of trying to determine, okay, I'm going to still keep my day job. I'll be a part-time apprentice. Then I have to study. Can I do that? Is that feasible? We have other archetypes like Andrea Mates. Is it Mates or Mates? Andrea, sorry if I butchered your name, from Austin, who's a stay-at-home mom. We've got several people like her who are balancing motherhood and left their old career and are now coaches. So these people listening are probably curious what the time commitment is like. Maybe you can start by answering that, and then outline exactly how you spend your time each week when you're going through the process of developing as an apprentice and working towards your SSC.
It happens frequently that we have people who want to pick it up, and it seems like analysis paralysis is the problem. And as far as how much time you can dedicate to this, there really isn't any ceiling, but as long as people are willing to come in for 2 or 3 classes a week and dedicate time to the online class, I'm really happy to have them in. I think that people occasionally think that this is a thing that can be done kind of on the side. Every once in a while, a client will say like, oh man, it seems like you have a really cushy gig. You get to like stand around, talk to people, do a little bit of yelling. Like, how do I get in? I feel like I could do a little bit of this on the side, and and it does kind of require that you radically warp your life around it if you are going to be good at it. Right.
You got to be bought in.
And what they're asking is kind of like a really lazy thing. It's like, hey, I could do this without like a whole lot of thought or investment, right? Like, you just pick this up. It's like riding a bike. And so by the time that you pass your platform, you will already be doing this full time. You will already be talking the talk and walking the walk and have done this professionally for some time, right? Your passing the credential is not going to be the culmination of anything. It will be acknowledging that has more or less already happened for you in a way, right? And while that certainly does come with more opportunity, I think that if the only thing that's driving somebody to do it is to get the credential and then to kind of rest on their laurels, it's the type of personality that's not going to be able to do it in the first place.
I'm really happy you mentioned that.
When it comes to...
Sorry to cut you off. I just want to interject quickly by saying, yeah, if you are not fully bought into this, if you're not fully committed, don't waste your time. Don't waste our time. There's skill and there's will, if we're looking at the 2 broad categories of evaluating a new hire. Don't care how good of a coach you are. I don't really know how good of a coach you are. We can check you out, whether you're the best coach you've ever seen or the worst. You can learn, you can add on to your skills in the gym. The skills can be taught as long as you have the will, which is why the will is the most important part. And if you're looking at this as just kind of a part-time gig to make some extra cash on the side, that will never, ever work. So don't bother. But if you are fully committed and you see this as part of your future and you want to become a coaching professional, not like people that work at these commercial gyms, but someone like Tony Stein at a place where people are paying $455 a month to get coaching from Tony and his staff. If you want to become that type of professional, you have to go through the process. You've got to learn the theory. You've got to learn the practical, and that takes time and it takes significant focus. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Tony.
So as far as getting through the course, it is really good if you have someone who's going through it alongside you, who's relatively close in timing, or who you can set aside maybe 2-3 hours a week so you can kind of talk over questions. Because I think a lot of this material is sort of asking you to argue a side, right? So I think when I turned in one of my first or second essays to Nick, there are word count suggestions for each of the essays, and a lot of them are 300 to 500 words. And I must have written an essay or turned in a paper where I was writing 100 words to every 300 that were suggested. And his feedback was, Tony, nothing that you've said is wrong, but there's just kind of a lot to the argument that you're leaving out. And I'd like to hear you flesh that out a little bit more, So it's fun because we have kind of like these, we have like iconic questions like, why is squatting safe for the knee? And you could really easily like rattle off something about like balancing the forces around the knee, right? But then there's another way where like you can back all the way up and you could start thinking about like, gravity and the forces acting on the body, about compression, tension, and moment. And then you could start to answer that question using the moment model. Or you could also think about like the length tension relationship in muscles, and you could kind of answer that question that way as well. And ultimately your answer is the same, but if you're going to skip straight to like, forces are balanced, it's safe, QED. The moment somebody tries to like poke at you, you're not going to be prepared for how those answers are constructed, right? So I think a lot of the questions for essays seem almost comically like their answers should be way shorter. And I think each of them is an opportunity to really think from the ground floor up about how these answers are built. And it's great because every answer kind of exists like in a place along a continuum of theoretical information for how these answers are constructed from first principles. And you need to be able to think forward and backward about how that's done. Otherwise, somebody's going to ask you a question, you're going to crap your pants because you don't know, right? So if that makes sense.
And I don't know is a phrase that we encourage in these gyms. One of my biggest grievances with this industry is how people that have no idea what they're talking about either have lied to themselves or are willing to lie to the member standing in front of them about what they do and don't know. And so for those of you coming up, please, especially in our gyms, please, if you don't know something, if you say, I don't know, that actually does what you're trying to do when you give a bullshit answer. When you give a bullshit answer, you're trying to build authority. But when you bullshit someone, most smart people can tell. And a lot of our members are more educated than some of the apprentices, by the way. So don't try to bullshit somebody. Don't bullshit anybody. If you don't know, just say you don't know. But you say, I'll find out. I'll get the answer for you. And then you'll learn, and the member will learn, rinse and repeat, and everybody benefits.
So I have a client who's making pretty amazing progress. He's very happy with the progress that he's making. He just got his deadlift up to a little over 3 plates. He's squatting in the mid 2s, and he's really close to benching 200. And he's weighing in around 200 pounds right now. And when he first started, he was weighing at 170, and he was in pain all the time.
Real quick, how long did it take him to go from 170 to 200 body weight?
Oh, let's say 6 months.
6 months. Okay. Please proceed.
Yeah. And he had also been seeing a physical therapist, and still sees a physical therapist from time to time for this ongoing pain. And, was really close to, when we first started, failing, reps at 135. And as time has gone on, we've had so many conversations where we've talked about food and about the process, and about his recovery and about managing injury. And now he's gotten his body weight up and pain is feeling so much better. And he's beginning to trust the process. But he came in one day and he's like, my physical therapist says that a lot of my low back pain is because my glutes are too weak. And they want me to start doing pause squats. And they suggest that I do them in here, you know? And I did it. We did a little bit of pause squats. I added some pause squats in the warm up. I'm going to be cool about that as long as we get our work done. And as long as it's not detracting from that. Right. But, I pick up one of the 10-pound plates and I hold it up to my chest and I'm like, how long can I hold this plate here? And he's like, oh, forever, for a while. And then I hold it at arm's length and I'm like, how long can I hold this plate this way? And he's like, a much shorter time. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, it's heavier that way. And I'm like, right, the force is multiplied by the length, right? And the muscles that operate my shoulder have to overcome that. And he's like, sure. And so we obviously have the graphic on the wall of our squat, but I point to that and then I draw an uncoached squat on the board. And I'm like, okay, so the process that's happening with my arm is happening here at your hip and your glutes operate that. And he just looks at it for a second and he's like, so our version should make the glutes stronger. And I'm like, that's what your conclusion is, right? That's what you're saying. I didn't say that. And he's like, it seems that way. I'm like, awesome. Let's go squat, And you need to be able to come up with explanations that are that salient, that are that quick, while still being able to explain in a deeper, more theoretical way why the same thing is true.
Yeah.
If you're going to be successful.
And what this PT doesn't understand about strength training is that a squat is superior to a pause squat if your goal is to make your glutes stronger. Because a pause squat reduces, it eliminates the stretch reflex from the bottom of the position, which means it makes the lift artificially more difficult, which means you will not be able to lift as much weight, which means you will not be able to get as strong. So if we had the opportunity to discuss that with this PT and then remind the PT that the function of the glutes, as he well knows, is to extend the hips, and that the more weight you're loading the hips with that they have to extend against, the stronger they will get, then he'll probably come around and see things from our point of view. If not, we're always open to being wrong. What's the counter argument? Tell us what we're missing here.
Right.
But the PT doesn't know about strength training, and that's pretty standard. But at least he's open to the idea of squats being useful to building strength, even if he doesn't know exactly how to do that.
So this client, we have a pretty good time at the gym. We tell a lot of jokes. Sometimes we talk some shit. It can be a lot of fun. And anytime somebody says something, kind of like mean or awful, right? Kind, but sometimes they make a mean joke. He'll joke that he's going to write the Google review for the place, like the expose Google review. And I told him, I'm like, I dare you. I'm like, I want to hear that, like, Coach Tony has said 5 of the worst things I've ever heard a human being say, and also got me strong when I didn't believe I can do it. So I'm like, put that review on, the right people will come.
The shit talking is part of what you're paying for. I mean, that's
100%.
Yeah, that's part of the experience.
Well, we've got some teenagers coming in and like learning how to rib each other in like a loving and caring way is a skill.
100%.
We get to help them with that.
Yeah. Learning how to insult somebody without offending them is quite an art. Right. Indeed. Where did this fella start, by the way? Because after 6 months, you got his body weight up. I think you said 30 pounds, and now he's deadlifting over 3 plates and squatting, 2 plates and a quarter, roughly. So where did he start?
When he first started with me, he'd been doing it by himself a little bit, and was around 135 on that squat, and still not yet 2 plates on the deadlift.
And what was his? What's his age, by the way?
I would guess mid-30s.
Mid-30s, okay.
Without pulling up any specifics.
Gotcha. Well, let's switch gears. Let's go back to your progression through this whole process. Can you outline for me what those steps were? So it's, your prospect, apprentice, coach, starting strength coach, head coach is the typical progression. What was your progression like? And if you can, I'd like you to share how much time you spent in each role and how much money you made in each role, if you're willing to share that.
Sure. Initially, so I started training myself in 2017. And after I had been doing that for a few months, anybody who would train with me, I would absolutely start training them for free, right? If you'd come to the gym, if you'd hang out, if there was some way to do it, I would help. And that included providing video help for a couple of friends. And so at that point, everything was basically for free. In 2018 was when I started my own business at home doing it, right? And so I was charging people, $200, $300, $400 for a monthly membership to come to my house and do it, right? I know I could have had a lot more people if I was doing it for free, but I also wanted people who are going to take it seriously, so that was the hard kind of selection process. And I figured that seemed like a reasonable price to charge. When I started at Starting Strength Houston, I think we opened late 2019, right? So initially as an unpaid intern, then I think as classes filled up, our original model was that we had 12-person classes, right? So some people would be sharing a rack. And as soon as a class passed 7 people, it meant that it needed an intern on hand to help manage that. And that was paid around $10 or so, right?
Per class or per hour?
Eventually we changed per hour.
Okay.
Right. So a class would be an hour and a half, right? We changed the model after COVID to be 8-person classes with a slight price increase, but it meant that the model no longer required an intern to be there, right? So currently you're getting an 8-person class with at least 1 coach, right? No sharing of a rack. But it means that the internships are also unpaid. So that's the thing that we go back and forth on. At this point, we have an intern who's been with us about 6 months, and we've just brought him on. We're now paying him, which we're really happy to be able to do. But it requires that a person is someone that we can begin to depend on, right? That we can schedule them to cover a class or an intro, and they're already there. A person isn't necessarily going to collect a wage for just showing up and observing yet, right?
Yeah, and that's actually where the distinction is made from the franchisor's point of view. If the person is there and they're just observing, they're not adding any value, you can justify that as an unpaid position. But as soon as the person starts participating and adding any level of value, that should be matched with some level of compensation.
So Dan has recently crossed the threshold from burden to actually being helped. So that's great. Yeah. He's like, yes. And we're really happy with that. Okay.
I remember once, by the way, I told an apprentice at Austin that he needs to become useful, and he was quite offended by that. I was like, this is not going to last, man. This is not, if you can't admit that you standing here does not provide any utility to anybody but yourself, you're not clear-headed about the situation, and that is not good.
Yeah, you'd occasionally run into that in kitchens, like somebody is about to clock out and it's like, oh, hey, would you like to stay and help do this, And it's like, oh, I'll do that when I'm paid to learn to do it. And it's like, okay, well, you're never going to get that job if you don't know. The job goes to the person who's already doing it, not the person who's waiting to be paid to do it.
That's right. Yep.
So the sooner that you can find out how to weasel your way into that role, whether or not people are asking you to do it, the better.
Yeah, go above and beyond, for Christ's sakes. Or in 2022, if you literally just do what your job requirement is, you will be considered exceptional in most industries.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that was always the game with Josh or Chase is could I be faster than them? Right? Could you fix something that they were trying to fix? Right? It was kind of a healthy competition always, right? And it's how are you ever going to be as good as however many years of experience such and such person has, right? But you get to stand on their shoulders, right? And then piggyback on that experience and try and use it to your advantage, right?
So what was the next step in your progression after you guys moved to 1 member per rack, and your presence at the gym was no longer necessary? You were just kind of shadowing and learning. What happened after that?
So that kind of happened, fortunately, just a few weeks before Chase was moving to Oklahoma, and after I had already passed the platform, I think right before I passed the oral. So everything worked out kind of serendipitously. And I think Chase sort of realized that we were a little saturated here in Houston as well, and was excited, definitely not to be any closer to home, right? But just to, go start another gym and to keep carving out new spaces for the franchise. So.
Got it.
So then, and what so I was able to step into his role just as a coach in the morning, quite quickly. And then Katie opened a few months thereafter. Right.
Got it.
So everything worked out very well time-wise. Because that's another thing, is that just because you've passed the platform or even the oral board doesn't mean that a job is guaranteed as a head coach.
For sure. It's subject to availability. You can have 100%. Whatever credential, but if the job opening isn't there at the gym, then you have to stay in whatever job you happen to be in. So for those coaches that are out there trying to figure out their career plan, just make sure that you have an agreed upon progression plan with your boss so that you both have an idea of where you want to go and when that might happen. And of course, there are no guarantees when you're looking to the future. So it's more of a general directional goal. What were you making, Tony, if you don't mind sharing? And feel free to punt these questions if it's sensitive, but I'm curious what your income was when you took over the morning sessions for Chase.
When I took over I believe that was in the 20s hourly.
Yep.
And now that we're in a head coach position, we're in the 30s.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. So you've tripled your pay in a couple years. $30 an hour if you're doing full time is $60K ish a year as a head coach who, you were not a professional coach before you joined this franchise, and now you've been coaching a couple years. And for our coaches that have been SSCs for a long time and have been professional coaches for a long time, some of those guys are making upwards of $80,000. If you include revenue from online coaching, $90,000. Are you doing online coaching at the moment, Tony?
Yeah, at one point I was up to around 15 clients. Now I'm down around 7 or 8. And I think maybe the sweet spot for me is around 5.
And what are you earning per client at the moment?
Around 130 or 40 or so.
So let's just call it another $1,000 a month. So
yeah, accurate.
You're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 grand a year.
Not bad, man. I'm not mad at it.
That's a good situation. That's a good situation. Congratulations. You earned it.
Much.
And the dedication
really
speaks for itself. And JD has nothing but nice things to say about you. And I got to tell you, it makes me, as the person who's nervous about every aspect of our quality, because that's our differentiator, it makes me feel comfortable that people like you are the ones staffing these gyms. So thanks for everything you've done.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
What else should we mention? What advice do you have for someone who's looking to do what you've done here?
Yeah. If somebody's thinking about doing this, they just have to enjoy the ride. Honestly, if you get bogged down in what the direction and the future is, and when the path will be legitimate and when you'll be a professional, I think it ends up stopping you from getting in and making mistakes, right? And I mean, especially, I was getting paid, but there were so few hours that I also was still coaching people at my house, and I was still bartending in the evening when I first started out doing this. So I would be at the gym with Chase at 5 a.m. And then fortunately I had an early bartending shift, so I'd be coming home at 9 p.m. To climb into bed and to do this again. And that meant that, there were times where I didn't feel like writing essays. And it meant that, if you woke up a half an hour before, the wife and the dogs, that you got to get on your phone and start typing up an essay real quick. Waiting for the time to do all of these things to present itself to you rather than making time for it means that it's never going to happen. Waiting to have a credential, or a pat on the back or whatever it is to get started means that you won't get started. And the lifestyle change is going to happen first, where you start dedicating all of your time to this and you start helping people and you start seeing their results. And then there will be affirmation from other people later, right? Yeah. But if you're waiting for that, it's not going to get off the ground.
Notice the parallels here, guys, to strength training. Those members that are waiting for the perfect opportunity, when they'll have enough time, when they won't be tired, when they'll have the headspace to improve their diet, when the new year starts, these are not successful strength trainees. These are not successful strength trainees. These are not the people that dedicate themselves to our gyms and spend the money that we require to afford staff like Tony. The same thing applies to wanting to become a coach. I think that's the main theme here. If you glean anything from Tony's process, experience, story, it is that you have to take ownership. You are the one responsible for your own progress. This applies to you as a trainee. This applies to you as a coach. If you're willing to go above and beyond, if you're willing to take responsibility for your education, then you can reap the rewards the way that Tony has. So I think that's a good message to end on, man. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, man. It'll be up in a couple of weeks.
Sweet.
All right, guys.
Thank you, dude.
See ya.